Yeah, no audio. How's that? Is that better? Sorry.
Oh gosh.
Sorry, guys. We didn't have the phantom power turned on. Can you hear us now?
Sorry. Okay, let me adjust this too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
I swear we're professionals.
um,
we're also both sick with colds, so forgive us. Colds, maybe it's a cold. Maybe it's something more. Who can say?
Maybe it's the cold.
Yeah, the coof, as they say.
This could be the last you hear from us.
I've got my flaming hot Mountain Dew here to keep me awake. So we'll see how that goes.
I've just got coffee. I'm hoping it takes care of my headache. So what I was just saying was that normally I have a stream on Monday nights, and we call it The Signal, where I talk indie news and a little bit about my upcoming review for the website. And then sometimes David joins me, sometimes it's just me, but we have a conversation about a topic related to reading or sci-fi fantasy or indies. And I didn't get to stream last night because I was sick with the cold and we had a Halloween party before that. And so it was just a lot. And this is just kind of a bonus episode because yesterday and today we had some interesting conversations on Twitter, and we thought that it would be a great jumping off point like we've done in the past.
Yeah, as long as emotions are running hot and everybody seems really engaged. I would not have guessed my spicy subtweets about this would have gotten the attention that they did. So it's and just to qualify a little bit here, like we're going to talk about our sort of positive view of how things should be, and we try to stay positive here.
I think it's important to point out that we're not stressed out about this.
Yeah.
We disagree fundamentally with excuse me we disagree fundamentally about the subject, but we aren't butthurt over being insulted, right?
And I think it's a fair criticism given that we are deliberately trying to be positive about things. I think it's a fair criticism for somebody to ask, why are you beating this dead horse or whatever? And my answer to that is kind of like a related thing a couple weeks ago with the Matt Walsh anime Satanic, which actually has a lot of parallels with this situation. The reason that we're continuing to tweet about, or at least I'm continuing, Katie can speak for herself, but it's just, on social media, you live and die by the algorithm, right? And this kind of stuff is good for the algorithm, and it's also good for finding people who agree with you, right? So I'm putting out my opinion. I'm not really trying to argue with Jeffro. I'm not really trying to change his mind. I'm not trying to change the minds of the people who like his take, and they're welcome to have their own take. Everybody is allowed to have their own opinion, and I don't want to begrudge them of that, but this is a way that, we can find new people who maybe share a more similar view to us about what we're doing. And for what it's worth, I've gotten a few followers out of this today, so I don't think it's gone to waste. And we've seen a lot of our other friends kind of post a little bit different takes, but it's neat to kind of see everybody's reaction to the situation. We're going to share some of those too. Yeah, I agree, Bradley. It's like Jeffro's allowed to have his opinion, but the sort of like calling people names is something I don't like. But we're gonna really try to get into what his argument is, deal with it honestly, try to understand it, and then explain why it sort of particularly rubs us the wrong way, because we have a bigger vision of what we're trying to do, on Twitter, in this space, in this community, whatever you want to call it. And again, kind of like the Matt Walsh anime satanic. It's like, oh well, that's just kind of somebody being a troll or hyperbolic, but it's sort of it's a statement that is running very contrary to some sort of deeply held opinions, vision, our current work. Why we're spending time on Twitter, right? Why we're engaging in this, right? So.
All right. So I've put together slides just so that you guys can see that we're not misrepresenting. We're not trying to like dogpile on him or anything. And so we are going to try and keep the focus on creating something positive, and not necessarily sort of wallowing in the he said this and then I said this and then he said that. So I think that I was the one that started this round of
Yep. And that's part of the reason why I've felt fine about continuing to engage in this, is that this is actually something that he started.
I was, and this is probably why I've been a little more aggressive since that tweet, just because I had been specifically talking about Iron Age, and to have him retweet that with a
well, you should just talk about your tweet first, because I think the next one is his.
Yeah.
And do you want to give people a little bit of insight? Because I mean, to be fair, you're jumping into a conversation here too. How did you find this conversation? Was it through TweetDeck or something with one of your searches, maybe. Or did it come across your timeline?
Oh, I don't remember now.
Okay.
I probably should have double checked that. But it had nothing to do with him. So
and I mean, so like jumping into other people's conversations is a fine thing to do on Twitter. That's one of the things that makes Twitter cool. So we're not criticizing him for that. Katie was sort of doing that here.
Yep, jumping into someone else's conversation.
But I mean, what she is doing here is saying something positive, right? So reading old books is fine, and there are good new books too.
Yeah. So that's where I was going with this, was just saying that we don't have to live in the past. We can enjoy the things of the past and the books that were written in any time period, but we also have entered into a new age. That's why we call it the Iron Age of indie innovation.
Yep.
And
Iron Age is kind of it's a very loose concept here. So we're not. I don't think we're describing ourselves as some kind of figureheads in Iron Age or anything. It's something that's getting a lot of talk and traction on social media right now. So it's something that you've found some good success in referencing.
Well, it's a nice way of talking about sort of the new movements that are happening, the sort of the new energy.
And it's a little bit broader than something like Pulp Rev.
Right.
Too.
Yep. Yep, and encompasses more than Comicsgate, right? It's like bigger, like an overall media movement. So and I've been a little bit maybe protective mother hen like about the Iron Age hashtag, because I really want it to be positive. And so that's maybe why I had more of a reaction to the retweet.
And that's just a tricky thing too in and of itself, because like I think a lot of people, when they're talking about the Iron Age, are thinking about Razor Fist videos, and he's kind of talking about a reaction against traditional publishing and modern woke media, stuff like that. So I mean, there's a little bit of a challenge for everybody in how we're marketing this. In terms of staying positive.
So he responded with, "Don't read anything after 1980," which is which is a thing that he does.
Yeah. So
this isn't the first time.
yeah, neither of us follow Jeff Rowe, and I think I've had him muted for a long time just because I mute people on Twitter that I find negative. And something that I want to be clear on is that we're both aware that this is a hyperbolic statement, and we are aware that this is a hyperbolic statement at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, recently I noticed, creeping on Jeff Rowe's timeline, he's promoting some indie authors. So he's promoting one of JDA's comics. He's promoting another indie book, which you actually just finished reading.
Yep. Shagduk.
Yep. Yeah, we're not sure how to pronounce it, but I think it's from Pylon Press.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're aware that this is a hyperbolic statement because Jeff Rowe himself is promoting some stuff that indie authors do.
Right.
And again, we don't feel like anybody is obligated to promote everybody or anybody.
Right.
Right. You can totally be on Twitter and you don't have to promote indie authors. You don't have to like indie authors, whatever.
Yeah.
But this is how he jumped in.
Yeah. I should say that initially I took this much more lighthearted because he's done the same thing to me in the past, and my interaction with him sort of escalated to the point where I was like, okay, he's doing this to be funny, and I honestly think he went easy on me because I'm a girl, but that because he didn't at that time lob anything like losers, illiterate,
moral failing,
yeah. Like, so my initial response to this was much more, oh, he's joking, than some of the doubling down became a little bit more than tiresome. It was like, okay, are you even really joking?
Yeah.
So we're just going to go through a bit and sort of talk about why he has that position.
Understand what it actually is, and we're going to try to understand his position honestly here.
Yeah.
Because I think, given that this is obviously a hyperbolic statement, a lot of the other stuff you can argue against a position, and we're going to argue a position that's like 2 or 3 notches dialed back from what he's actually saying in the streets. So
this is an unrelated tweet that I found on his timeline when I was just doing a little stalking, right? That I think kind of gets at part of why he says 1980. He's responding to somebody, but he's addressing this to somebody, so I'm not sure what the entire conversation is because he wasn't actually directly responding to them. The shift that happened around 1940, where it was evident there was a culture war within sci-fi fantasy to unseat the pre-1940 leaders and challenge enough taboos to move the culture to something actively anti-Christian. Anti-racism as a substitute for traditional morals began here. 1980 is interesting in that the war against the past appeared to cease, so the roots of the genre became more obscured when the previous well-nigh universal reference points lapsed fully into obscurity. This marked the dawn of tacky and rootless pink slime fantasy, very bland.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my initial thought here is that may be so, that there may have been these cultural shifts.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean, one, that all fiction after 1980 falls into those.
Even traditionally published sort of derivative stuff, right?
Falls into that pink slime, or that there isn't a new movement happening that is sort of going back to a more
Mm-hmm.
Christian culture,
Yeah.
less
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but something more productive and building up something different than what has been immediately before us.
Mm-hmm.
As creatives, if that makes sense, which I would say is that sort of post 1980s problem that he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's my initial first blush response to this.
Yeah. Something else to notice here. So he talks about the roots of the genre becoming obscured.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is sort of a theme of a lot of the stuff that Jeff Rowe talks about is there's a sort of set of kind of primal influences on the genres of science fiction and fantasy that a lot of people aren't even aware of, that people should be more aware of and should read and enjoy and understand that these things didn't just come out of nowhere with Tolkien or whatever. Now, what I think we might get into a little bit later is that while these are influences, I don't think that they are necessarily roots of the genre in terms of the things that people like about Tolkien, right? So I think something that's sort of happening here is that there's sort of like aspects of Tolkien that maybe the people who like these influences like, and that's what they like about Tolkien. And then there's other aspects of Tolkien that don't come from those influences, and that's what other people like about Tolkien. And then the sort of stuff that Jeffrey calls pink slime or derivative or whatever is more following after those influences or aspects of Tolkien that he doesn't like. And he sort of sees that as a problem, which that's fine if that's your preference, but there are aspects to these things. There are aspects to these things that that different people value in different ways. And I don't think it's fair to say, oh, this the genre was destroyed because these things were obscured, when there's sort of maybe a different genre now. And TJ mentions in the chat a lot of what we like about Tolkien was innovative. No, and I agree. So I've had conversations. I'll just try to be brief about this, but I've had conversations with people on Twitter about this, specifically about Tolkien's world building. And I know a lot of pulp riff people don't like world building, like the kind of like drawing accurate maps, big family trees, that kind of thing. But that, I think, was something that Tolkien did to a degree that people who came before him maybe didn't do, right? And following after Tolkien, there's a whole genre of people, of books and people who really like that kind of stuff, right? So that's maybe not something that Tolkien got from Dunsany, as far as I understand. Could be wrong, but that's maybe one aspect that I would cite, and that's one of the things about Tolkien that I like, right? And is an influence in my work, not the Dunsanian sort of fairy tale, myth synthesis type stuff, but more just the a big expansive story with family trees and like carefully charted physical locations and things like that. So won't go too far down that rabbit trail, but that's something that I wanted to mention.
And I think before we move off this slide, and like you said, we'll probably get into this a bit more later. If we're going to talk about roots,
mm-hmm.
to extend that metaphor maybe a little bit, like in order to understand a tree, you don't have to dig out the roots, right? You don't have to
look
them.
at every last root that's hidden under the ground.
Yeah, so what the fact that they are there is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't read that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there is merit in understanding
Mm-hmm.
where those roots come from, where they're going,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. But even if you just see part of the tree, you know it's a tree, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fiona Wolf is talking about pulp versus world building, and they're both important, and there's variety. Yes. So that's sort of another thing, right? I mean, we advocate for variety, right? I want to see a variety of stuff. I don't want everything to be the same. I don't like every genre, and I don't expect other people to like every genre. I don't expect everybody to like the genres that I write, and that's fine.
And she follows up with, I get that popularity and money play a factor in what writers will concentrate on, but I hope more people will write to what they find relevant and interesting. And I think that kind of embodies where we're coming from a bit. We feel that Jeffro's position kind of ignores personal preference, and on both the reading and the writing end of things. So, and we probably will get a bit more into that a little bit too.
Yep.
So kind of continuing to flesh out his position. This was in response to one of your retweets with nah.
Yeah. So I retweeted him a couple times saying nah, just to not argue, but just say I disagree, right? And I think this was just in response to his don't read anything before 1980. And then he made some comment on mine like, don't read indie authors, especially if they're Yankees. So I don't know if he is guessing that we're Yankees or knows that we're Yankees or something, or if he was talking about somebody else. I honestly don't know. Whatever. And then he retweeted with these. And again, I think it's important to understand that our position is not that you should not read these books, right? A couple of people, I'm not going to name names, but a couple of people in response to some of Jeffro's responses to us, kind of, in response to him saying, oh, it's silly to not read these things, which, I'm not, again, we're not advocating don't read them. Some people were saying, oh, it's silly to read something like, oh, it's imagine knowing who Lord Dunsany is. Well, it's not ridiculous to know who Lord Dunsany is. If you like reading this stuff, you should read it. And if you do actually want to sort of do a more academic deep dive into like where Tolkien and Lovecraft Brad says you can just say that was me. Yeah. And Brad, I saw some of your follow-up tweets. I don't think that you meant I don't know if you really meant, oh, it's silly. I think, you were kind of batting what he was pitching back at him, so that's understandable. But our position is not that you shouldn't read these books. Our position is that you're not obligated to read these books to be able to enjoy the works that they influence. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me that this is even a thing that needs to be said, right? Yeah. Brad says he was just reciprocating kind. Understandable. Twitter is not a place for subtlety and argumentation. So that's understandable, and we're trying to give this conversation a little bit more fleshed out treatment here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he gives these books, but yeah, our position is not don't read these, right? Our position is you don't have to read these to enjoy other books, which is something that he is going to argue later.
Yeah. So here he's saying that if you read these, your perception of the field, your understanding of science fiction and fantasy is going to be changed. I I'm not sure that I would say that. I think that
Yeah.
you like if you're a writer and you go into reading these, you may come away with useful things about writing,
Yeah.
things that you want to apply to your own stuff or
Mhm.
whatever. If you're a reader, I don't think I guess maybe I just don't think that that any book is going to change my perception of a genre when genre is largely marketing. It's a way for other people to find what they like, for readers to find the titles that they are going to enjoy
Mhm.
before they open the book.
Yeah.
I think, and that's why I think arguing about genre is kind of a futile,
Yeah.
if entertaining, discussion, because
Yeah, it's kind of funny that he even says, will blow your mind and alter your perceptions of the field, because there's a lot of people in pulp rev who have very interesting opinions about genre. You know, argue that science fiction and fantasy are actually the same genre, or the real genre is adventure.
yeah,
And it's like, I don't know, to me, like what even is the field of science fiction and fantasy?
yeah,
I mean, it's obviously a thing. I mean, your website is science fiction and fantasy
yep,
reviews, so it's definable, but it's so big. Like, what does it really mean that like you could read 4 books and they would change your perception of the field? It's like, okay, so these are four books and they might be really good, but they
yeah,
may or may not have anything to do with the part of it that I think is interesting,
right,
right? And that's fine.
yeah. I think, and I don't think that including these under the umbrella of science fiction and fantasy is going to change what that umbrella means.
Yeah.
I think I like I said, my opinion about what science fiction and fantasy mean individually, like as separate things, is largely about connecting readers with what they want. Like you can shelve Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, well, that's space
Fantasy.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Well, if you shelve it on the fantasy section, nobody's going to touch it because nobody goes to the fantasy
Yeah.
section looking for space.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah, and especially as an indie author, I think we've talked about this. One of the things that we really like about indie fiction is how it can sometimes do these genre mashups that aren't really allowed in traditional publishing. And so you're allowed to do that, but at the same time, you have to be realistic and think, okay, I have to be able to describe this to readers, and how are readers going to understand things. And I honestly think a lot of this stuff that Jeffra is talking about, it's cool, but it's like not what people necessarily think about these days when they think about fantasy, right? Especially in some of the original conversations, like somebody mentioned, and I don't know if we snipped that at some point, but somebody mentions Sanderson, Card, and Robert Jordan. And it's like, okay, if you like those guys, Dunsany is just not going to do it for you, right? It's a very different thing,
feel. Yep.
right? And that's fine, right? You're allowed to like Dunsany, and you're allowed to like Orson Scott Card and Robert Jordan.
And all of them are considered sci-fi fantasy, right?
Yep.
So saying saying that these guys are
Yeah.
these books are also sci-fi fantasy
Mm-hmm.
isn't going to, because it's so
Yeah.
big,
Well,
right?
and William Rankin here is pointing out that he views these works as foundational, a matrix in which the genre swims, so to speak. And that's correct. But again, I think there's just so many other things that make the modern iterations of these what they are and what people like, that we can't just totally ignore those things.
And I understand that he thinks that these are foundational,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't understand how thinking of them as foundational would alter my perception.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe this is just like a throwaway
Yeah.
tweet that I'm trying to read too much
Yeah.
into.
Well, William Rankin here is a nice follow-up. You don't have to know about the Matrix to exist in it, and that's true. I mean, it's good. It's good to be aware of those boundaries and those influence. We're not arguing that it's a fine pursuit, but we're arguing against the obligation, which is going to come in with here in just a second.
Okay, I think this is another just fleshing out how he why he makes the hyperbolic statement.
Oh yeah,
1980.
and I think this is rich. This is rich.
So he's responding to someone who is talking about comics specifically, but he's applying it to indie authors. Used to be comics were written by guys who led real lives. Now they're written by people who grew up reading comic books, copies of copies, getting even ever shabbier. And he says the indie author types that are heckling me really don't grasp this. I guess so here he's saying, he's agreeing with Dan, who is saying that reading is not good at this point, right? So like this is,
well, I think my understanding of what's going on here is it's kind of an argument about there's a canonical set of things that should influence you.
yeah,
And then if you are being influenced by things beyond that, then that's bad. And furthermore, these older authors who were working off of that canonical set of influences were also like real men who maybe like fought in a war or sailed a ship or punched people in real life, so they can write better stories.
But reading their better stories doesn't necessarily make you able to write good stories.
Well, I think here he's maybe talking like a earlier, like the first generation of people who are influenced by his Matrix, or maybe that's kind of what he was referencing.
So
right?
comics written by guys who led
well, okay, yeah.
real lives.
Sorry, I'm kind of getting these guys goofed up here. So,
and I would assume that that is like the canon, the original,
the canon comics, yeah.
Right?
Or maybe the first generation or two,
yeah,
removed from the canon.
Sure.
Yeah, I think maybe to not get into it too much. I don't want to put words in his mouth here, but I think he's arguing that there's sort of a removal of there's a distance from the primal influences that's bad, and this kind of like there used to be these men who wrote these books that had cool life experiences that people don't have anymore.
Yeah.
Which there's not much you can do about, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I just not allowed to write adventure fiction because I've never sailed a boat? I don't know. Like, I don't know if he's saying that, but I don't really I have trouble with that kind of argumentation.
Yeah. And I think, well, and maybe these guys would probably, Chad meme, throw out everything written by female authors, but a lot of the sort of classic literature that we have that was written by female authors was written by people who had no experience doing anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like Jane Austen spent pretty much her whole life in her room. Like she was severely introverted.
Yeah, she didn't even have any like personal romance really to draw on.
So I really reject that you have to live in a certain way in order to write certain things that just.
Well, I think we've talked about this on some other episodes too, but you as an author can pull in elements from your life into your work, even if it's not personal experience of wild adventure. Right. So just to toot my own horn a little bit, in my books, I have a lot of things that come from personal experiences that I've had that are sort of outside the action parts of the book. So a lot of the theological stuff, there's like these love triangles and a lot of like pining for people that is kind of based on my experiences with, like liking girls in college and weird love triangles and things like that. In my second book, the main character plays the piano, and there's like 3 piano pieces that are mentioned throughout the story that are piano pieces that I played, and they have sort of a specific meaning to me that is also used, like represents their context in the story. So there's all kinds of things that, okay, even if you're not like a whaler, right? Or if you didn't fight in the trenches in World War I, you can take from your own life and put in your own books. So, that's a thing.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to say, okay, I have 2 points. I think it's also important to say that just because you have exciting life experiences doesn't mean that you have to write about them.
Yeah, that too.
If you, for example, Tolkien, he did not write about the war.
Yeah, trench warfare or whatever.
He incorporated his experiences in ways that were relevant to what the story that he was trying to write. And it clearly impacted him. There's tons of literature about how that impacted him. But it's not something that he put into a scene, you know what I mean? So that's the first point I want to make. The second point is this completely discounts any life experiences that these writers did have, like this position that Jeffro is approving, because there are people who still have experiences that are far and away outside of mine, right? That maybe they're not shooting people up in a foreign country, but they very well could be, right? Like I know several indie authors, one for sure that I've reviewed, who is a veteran, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea that there aren't people living real lives and writing books is ridiculous.
Yep.
So
yeah, there's I can think of a lot of examples of stuff in indie fiction that I've read where it's like the author is putting really cool, unique elements from their lives and their experience into their work. So obviously not everyone. Obviously there's a lot of you know, modern stuff that's just kind of people pull out of their asses. But you know,
Yep.
I think to be positive is to say that, you know, instead of kind of whining about stuff written after 1980, is to look for the good stuff and say, yeah, it is out there.
Yeah. This is where he begins to really double down on stuff and get into arguments that we find less.
Yep. We're growing less sympathetic.
Right. That's what I'm trying
and
to
again,
say.
I think, you know, understanding that the don't read books before 1980 thing is clear hyperbole. You can read the rest of these tweets and dial things back a notch, and we're still sort of in disagreement with it.
So he says it's not enough to take the time to expose yourself to forgotten classics of science fiction and fantasy. You also need to hate the gray sludge that was extruded to push them out of the broader consciousness. And I'm pretty sure when he talks about gray sludge here, he's talking about stuff like Robert Jordan, Orson Scott Card. Yeah.
Who is the other author that was mentioned in that?
I don't remember. I think I might have it.
It was Jordan, Card, and somebody else. I think I just mentioned it, but it was Brandon Sanderson. Yeah. So when he talks about gray sludge here, here we go. Hey, John. John's here for the drama. Yeah. So when I think it might have been it might have been John that responded to one of those tweets and said, I still like those authors. And
yeah.
And then he called John saying that he still liked those authors a
moral failing.
Or, no, not a fail. It was a moral shortcoming.
What? Are you sure? I'm pretty sure it was failing.
Okay. Well,
it was going to look it up.
Yeah, it was one of those two. But anyway.
Or maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, when he talks about gray sludge here, he's not talking about like the kind of woke trad pub nonsense that we rail on. He's talking about books that people really like and draw great inspiration from. Right. So that's a little concerning. And I mean, if Jeff wants to say, oh, I wasn't talking about Brandon Sanderson or whatever here, but I think that's what I took from the context of the conversation.
Going, like we said, from the assumption that he is using hyperbolic language, and we just dial him back a little bit to try and find his actual point. We know he does promote indies on his Twitter feed. So
yeah, he promoted John's comic.
Yep. So he's probably not talking necessarily about indies. He just likes to.
Yeah, but he's probably talking about some of these works that indies found.
Probably more traditional.
Yeah.
Published stuff. Taking that as our assumption, he's still sort of attacking and throwing shade at anyone's enjoyment of that kind of literature, which I have a problem with.
Yeah.
I really, really dislike people saying, if you liked X, you're wrong.
Yeah.
You have a wrong perception of the world. You're a child. You need to grow up.
Yep.
You need to be exposed to more X, Y, or Z. You need to develop your taste. Those things are arguments that I don't agree with.
I think another thing here, and we'll get into this in more detail, but you know, we have this vision of it's just a good thing for people to create.
Yes.
And I really have a hard time saying that anything short of like pornography, if it motivates somebody to want to create themselves, I have trouble with saying that that's a bad thing, right? So even if you actually thought that one of these books that he's citing as an influence is bad, it's like it's doing something good if it's motivating people to create themselves. Something that a place that this comes up a lot is video games. So people will cite video games as an inspiration for their writing. Like I cite Japanese RPGs as a big reason that I got into writing, and indeed, like my fictional world and stories started out as a story for a video game that I was developing as a teenager that I was really highly motivated to make by playing Final Fantasy VII and reading about Xenogears. So if those things are what motivated me to kind of start on this creative endeavor that has really brought a lot of fulfillment to my life, I think even if you don't like video games, I think it's really rude to just say, oh, those are just bad. Because, I mean, there are a lot of these things are motivating people to do their own creative work, and I think that's good.
Yeah. And Fiona Wolf raises the point about gray sludge morality, which we've talked a bit about before, and I try to engage with the themes of the indie authors that I review, sort of to highlight where they're diverging from that trend that has been ongoing probably since 1980. But I think it's important in the context of this conversation to acknowledge that those elements, while unfortunate, and we are doing cooler, better, more
morally sound stuff.
Yeah, now like in the new sort of indie trend, with like Iron Age and stuff, that the Sanderson and those guys, like they're still producing stuff that a lot of people enjoyed, and they were still producing fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Not that everything has to be fun. But
right. But like,
as opposed to the sort of modern, really depressing,
right
stuff.
Yeah, they were still producing entertainment of value, is what I'm trying to say, right? Like, and maybe nothing that they, and you could argue, I suppose, that nothing that they produced is going to last 100 years or whatever, but I don't think that means it's gray sludge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's another conversation that I've seen happening on Twitter, like what great literature is going to be left of this, and I have my own take on that too. We might get into. Fiona Wolf is lamenting that all of this went down while she was on vacation.
Oh. So then another like response was just sort of saying that Dunsany was underrated. And he's saying in the 1970s, he was the most imitated fantasy author and considered to be the best fantasy author of all time by most people in the field. There's that phrase, "in the field," again. That's just kind of odd. If you aren't familiar with him, you don't know the genre at all and don't deserve to have an opinion. All right. I think that's it. Maybe a little bit
much.
I have trouble dialing this one back at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because he says it in several different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Going forward here, like I said, I don't think you have to dig up the roots of a tree to understand that it is a tree,
Mm-hmm.
and to draw conclusions about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I disagree with this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we come to a tweet that I ended up responding to and sort of brought me back into the conversation. This one, so this is not connected at all with any of the ones that I was connected with earlier, but it's part of that ongoing conversation. Can you understand an author without being familiar with their most immediate influences? No, you can't. The reason that post-1980 fiction is subpar as a class is that it is generally written as if these conversations never even occurred. It rejects the very concept of a canon. So we're going to take the first part of this and respond to it, and then we'll take the second part a little bit later with talking about canon.
Doug Wise has got a good observation here. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean by received imagination. I can guess, but I think he gets into that a little bit more later, where he's talking about sort of what
is that like a shared subconscious, public subconscious.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That I'm not using the correct words for that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So he says yes, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like it's more of a sort of a foundation, or like William Rankin was saying, sort of a matrix by which that other people were working in.
Yeah.
Um,
So my response, I didn't clip my GIF.
did we talk about both parts of that?
No, I said we'll take that a little bit later.
Okay.
So I responded with the hoity-toity SpongeBob GIF, and then commented this underneath to sort of flesh out my the reason that I was saying that.
Yep. Twitter threads are great, people. I've been having really good luck with Twitter threads. You know, obtuse reaction GIF, and then clarify what you mean.
Yeah, me too. I've been enjoying.
Yeah.
It seems like I get more eyes on stuff
if it's a thread.
Yeah. And I get a lot of likes and retweets of the second thing in the thread, but I still get most of my interaction off the first thing. Just a few data points for you guys.
Florida man is out of energy. See you later, TJ.
I just said that I disagree with the premise that only the well-read can write good stories and that only the well-read can understand them, which I think accurately represents what I think. Yep. And I mentioned this to you. I think that part of the problem with this conversation is that Jeffro is exaggerating to the point where he's defending a position that he doesn't even hold, right?
Yeah.
And that, like, don't read anything after 1980. But I respond with like hyperbolic, sort of in the same sort of vein, right? Yep. Like with the hoity-toity and like stuff like that. But like I'm trying to accurately represent what I actually think.
Yeah, we're not going. We're trying to say stuff in a goofy way in response, but we're not like exaggerating beyond what we actually think.
Yeah.
Right. So this statement by Katie is not hyperbole.
Right.
And it probably is a little bit controversial, especially the part where she's denying that only the well-read can write good stories. I think it's very, very common writing advice to say you have to read a lot to write well. I mean, I agree with that too, but I think the problem is that who is defining what well-read is?
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're going to sort of argue that, you should, read what you need to read to understand your influences to the degree that you need to write the story that you want to write. And don't feel like you have to consume everything or understand everything before you can write.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you should read. I think that is universally good advice. I think that if you're wanting to be a writer, you should definitely be reading. I think that reading within your genre is important to understand what your reader expectations are.
Yep.
So this is important. If you are writing for readers of Dunsany, then you need to be reading him.
Yeah. Or if you're claiming him as an influence, you're saying I'm writing in this style, or people who like that stuff, right? Oh, Patrick's here. Hey, Patrick. I think, yeah. If that's your primary influence, then you need to read it. But it doesn't have to be your influence.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have to be your influence, and it doesn't have to, it doesn't have to be your influence if your influence is one of the people that he influenced.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. I think if you want to write like Tolkien, more power to you.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to be doing some reading of Tolkien.
Yeah.
And you need to be thinking about what about Tolkien you like and want to emulate, which may have nothing to do with Dunsany's influences on him.
Exactly. And I would kind of put myself in this camp. So I would count Tolkien as one of my biggest influences. I have not read everything by Tolkien. And I am aware and have been aware for probably over 10 years that Dunsany is a big influence on Tolkien. Everything that I've read of Dunsany, I just don't really like. And to me, it comes across as sort of satirical, silly, weird, fairy tale type stuff. Whereas the stuff what I like about Tolkien is the serious, grounded family trees, a world that has a map that you can measure, right? So I can acknowledge that Dunsany is an influence on Tolkien, but he doesn't have to be an influence on me, right? And I'm not obligated to understand Dunsany to take what I like from Tolkien and do what I want with it.
Yep. Jeffrey Rankin feels that there's too much good sense happening here, so we should probably get into more drama.
Yeah.
Jeffro retweeted me with, people like this think that they can make seminal contributions to fields they have only cursory exposure to, but I guarantee their imaginations are conscribed by just a handful of movies and little else. Not knowing what they don't know, they refuse to believe anything more can exist.
One thing right off the bat that I just want to comment about is that, like, neither of us is claiming to be like making a seminal contribution to a field here. So I don't know where he's getting that from. I mean, maybe he's really not maybe he's really not talking about Katie, but sort
I
of
think-
talking about somebody else.
I think he's,
But it's kind of a rude way to do that if that's what he is doing.
Mhm. I think he's not talking about me. I think he's talking about indies in general, maybe
Yeah.
in a sort of conglomerate way that I'm somehow
Mhm.
representing here.
Or that or maybe he's talking about people like Brandon Sanderson or Robert Jordan, or
Sure.
people who are like, who maybe are actually sort of considered to be seminal or think that they're seminal,
Yeah.
but like their influences are sort of wrong or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because I don't think it makes any sense to assume that this is actually supposed to respond to me. Because I'm not an indie author. Maybe my reviews could be considered contributions to the field, I suppose. But
What field though? The field of indie authors on Twitter that we like. Like this is also my problem with this, is like what are you even talking about when you talk about a field? Like
yeah,
it doesn't,
I'm not sure.
there doesn't have to be a field, and we'll get into this at the end. But you know, my vision is not that we're charting out something in particular. We're just promoting things that we like and letting people find cool books that we like.
Yeah. So I responded to him just directly, not retweeting, that I didn't need to prove that I'm some special class, and that this was an elitist argument. Sort of, you have to be, excuse me, you have to be well read, well researched, academically inclined in order to understand what you're reading, what you're trying to write,
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. I'm more sort of focused on what he's actually saying about readers, as
Mhm.
opposed to indies, with the original comment
Yeah.
that I was responding to, that you have to be well read to even understand. Like, if I can't understand Tolkien without knowing how he's influenced by other writers that came before him.
And to be charitable, right? I mean, there's a definition of understand there, where you could probably say you should read Lord Dunsany to understand Tolkien, right? In sort of an academic sense of understanding.
Sure.
But I don't think you have to read Lord Dunsany to sort of get what Tolkien is trying to do in Lord of the Rings, and it would be sort of a failure.
Yep.
Like we've argued on this show about theme, and you know, in our response to Conan's thread about how a work should kind of stand on its own, regardless of your developed taste or different things, sort of external things. So like, you should be able to understand Tolkien on some level without having to study his influences.
Yeah. And I should still be allowed to have an opinion about it without having read everything about his, all of his influences, if that makes sense. Because he was saying, if you haven't read Lord Dunsany, you don't understand the genre, you don't deserve to have an opinion.
Yep.
And then he responded with that I was gloating about being illiterate. When what I was actually trying to point out was like, maybe you should think about like who you were retweeting, because like I don't need to prove that I'm part of some special class, but if there was a special class, in order to understand stuff, like I've checked a lot of boxes, if that makes sense. I'm a lit major.
You have a degree in English literature.
Yeah, and I did in my undergrad writing about Tolkien, I've read a ton of sci-fi fantasy, mostly fantasy side of stuff.
Yeah, not just indie stuff.
Not just indie stuff. My background in Lord Dunsany is thin. And the reason for that is because I don't remember any of his stories.
And you don't really like it.
I don't, because I didn't. So I didn't know when I read him that he was some sort of phenomenal, foundational author. So I didn't like, oh, I need to have an opinion about this guy when I was reading him. And so only really recently, like since I've started Twitter, did I realize that other people had opinions about him. And so I don't remember any. I found him forgettable. So
and that's okay, right? Not everybody has to have the same opinion. It's totally fine to really like Lord Dunsany.
Absolutely.
We're not here to say that that's stupid. We're here to argue against the idea that you have an obligation to study the influences of the people that you like.
Yeah.
Just because somebody says so.
Right.
William Rankin mentions his experience with King of Elfland's daughter. Yeah, and that's kind of my experience with Dunsany too. You know, it's fine, but it doesn't give me anything that that I'm looking for. And again, I think so. Just to get into it, it's like he's either misunderstanding or deliberately misunderstanding, right? Katie here is not gloating about being not widely read. I guess illiterate can mean not widely read as well as just can't read. So it isn't necessarily just a totally shameful insult. But yeah, I mean, we're not saying it's good to not read Lord Dunsany. We're saying you don't have to.
Yep.
And I don't know if he just doesn't get that or if he's again being sort of hyperbolic and mean or what.
Right. And then here's a couple of other subtweets about the issue. This new wave of indie authors don't even like to read great books.
Mm-hmm.
And then typical indie author today thinks reading classic books is elitist.
Yeah.
Like these are completely misrepresenting.
Yeah. I mean,
my point.
I like reading Tolkien and Lovecraft, and I believe that Jeff Rowe Johnson thinks that Tolkien and Lovecraft are great books, and he thinks that they're classics. So, you know, there's one person here that is making these claims about people shouldn't read certain things or people won't read certain things or somebody saying that people won't read things. It's not us, right?
Yeah. And I was saying that his argument was elitist, not that reading classic books is elitist, right?
Yeah. It's elitist to say that you have to read classic books to understand something.
Right.
The act of reading classic books is not elitist. We read classic books, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think we all agree here that Tolkien and Lovecraft are classic. So
yeah, we're not saying that the opposite of what he says is true. We're not saying don't read anything before 1980.
Yeah.
Right? Like that would be stupid.
Yeah. I might have said that in a goofy tweet or something, but that was me being deliberately obtuse, and I would hope that wasn't taken literally, but who knows. This was my response to you want to just back up a couple slides again to that tweet because the immediate influences language is what he used. No, it was
this one.
Yeah, can you understand an author without being familiar with their most immediate influences? No, you can't. So my response is Giga Chad with Ray and Asuka reading Tolkien and Lovecraft without having read their most immediate influences. And of course, he takes this to mean that I'm patting myself on the back for not being familiar with Lord Dunsany again. So I'm not patting myself on the back for not being familiar with Lord Dunsany. I think, my opinion is reading what you enjoy is a Chad move. And I think that reading what you enjoy and not feeling obligated to read what other people say that you should enjoy is a Chad move, right? To draw a parallel here between what Jeffro's doing and sort of modern tradpub does is modern tradpub says this is the canon, this is what you should enjoy. You need to enjoy books that have X, Y, and Z, and you're not allowed to like stuff that doesn't have that. Like Lovecraft is reviled because of his views on certain things. That's bad. You're not allowed to like it, right? Because, yeah. Instead you have to like some kind of progressive alternative or whatever. Now, I think something that maybe sets me apart from a lot of pulp rev people is that I think that there are a lot of things that are maybe sort of modern that you're allowed to enjoy, right? I like Star Wars. A lot of people on Twitter don't like Star Wars. I like Star Wars. I'm always going to love Star Wars. I feel like a Chad when I do my Star Wars stuff because it's something that I enjoy and I feel good about it. That's what I'm trying to convey here is like I can enjoy the things that I enjoy without feeling obligated to do stuff because somebody on the internet says so.
Yeah.
And that is honestly my intention here. So
yeah.
I did not intend to make this to be gloating about not having read Dunsany or Dunsany.
And again, like the meme is that he is reading. Right?
Yeah.
It's not saying don't read.
Yeah. And it's Tolkien and Lovecraft. Again, does Jeffro not like Tolkien and Lovecraft? I don't think so. I think he thinks Tolkien and Lovecraft are good. I think maybe he's a little bit salty about their influences not getting acknowledged as much as them. But I think we all like Tolkien and Lovecraft, right? So again, like I don't see what the problem is. I'm enjoying things that I like. I think we even agree that Tolkien and Lovecraft are good. And he's kind of taking this as gloating or as sort of a personal insult. I mean, it is. I am subtweeting him here, but so he's welcome to respond. But
okay, so now we're gonna take a look at the second part of that tweet. Oh gosh, Patrick. yeah, that's the one. So the second part of his tweet is the reason that post-1980 fiction is subpar as a class is that it is generally written as if these conversations never even occurred. It rejects the very concept of a canon. And we're going to sort of talk about the idea of a canon, and we're going to interact with not Jeffro about it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think our position is that we don't need to have a canon.
Mm-hmm.
There,
at least for what we're doing, right? There's probably an academic. There's academic value in it, but that's not what we're here to do.
Yeah. If you are digging into, in an academic sense, the foundations of sci-fi and fantasy, there's probably a canon that you could establish relevant to the topic that you are researching, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So even there's still flux.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to writing, when it comes to reading what you enjoy, there's not like a prerequisite list of stuff that you should read so that you can understand.
Yep.
There's not.
That is Jeffro's position,
Seems to
right?
be,
Like,
yeah.
and that's his sort of Appendix N book is about
Right.
that. It's like, what is this almost like required reading list of the influences on Dungeons and Dragons, right? I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms, right? We don't come from a tabletop RPG
Right.
background, so that's not a part of this that appeals to us. But that idea that there's sort of like this required reading list seems to be something that he's advocating for, and we just don't share that same opinion.
Right. I have a nice little anthology called Tales Before Tolkien, and
Has Dunsany in it.
Yep. And
it actually has a story that Tolkien mentioned.
You could read that and still not even scratch the surface of all of the things that influenced Tolkien.
Yeah.
So like the idea of a narrow, and maybe he's talking about on the idea of a canon as a larger, like, impactful works type of thing here. But when we're also talking about influences, that it just gets a little confused, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's what he means is like it's the larger list of works that are seminal in the field or genre or whatever.
So I guess we are coming from the position that we reject the concept of a canon for people who are not academics.
Yep. Or if you're just not interested in that,
right,
you shouldn't feel obligated to.
Yeah. There are people who seriously enjoy reading and analyzing,
understanding
influences and stuff like that, and I am generally one of them. So I'm not at all saying that you shouldn't do that kind of stuff, and I think there's value in doing that kind of stuff. I paid thousands of dollars to be schooled on how to do that, right? Like, so I want to make clear that that's also not my position.
But for a reader, right, you just you come home after a long day of work, you want to enjoy something, just read something you like. Don't feel like you've got to read some list of works before you can engage with and think about and appreciate something.
And if you're a writer, don't feel like you have to do all of this reading before you can put the pen to the page, right?
Yep.
Like and this goes back to sort of my beliefs about how stories work, and like the idea of like the true myth. Like, stories are built into us. So you don't have to have like all of this literature under your belt before you can produce a story. So then he comments on Dorian Key's. Dorian Key is responding to my tweet about Jeffro's thing about canon, and he says a good book holds up when it is compared with the broader canon. A great book actually ends up becoming a part of the canon. And I think the point we want to make is that a lot of indie authors are not even attempting such a thing. They're just trying to find their people, their readers, the ones who want what they've written, to connect with their niche market, right? A lot of, you made this point earlier when we were talking about this, a lot of indie authors are publishing books that could not be published traditionally because they are
so like cross
genre, making thematic points that
weird thematic points
that are just not in the general discourse.
A lot of based on personal experiences,
Yeah.
right? Like I'll acknowledge that like some of the like the theological stuff and like the love triangle stuff in my book is very personal. And I know from like people who come from a similar religious background as me that they picked up on a lot of that stuff, but it's not necessarily like a big universal theme that is going to put it in some kind of canon, and that's okay.
Yeah. So the idea that a book will only be good if it can stand alongside Tolkien,
or that your goal should be to create a seminal work, or a work that becomes part of the canon. I mean, it can be if you want to, but
that would be an undertaking, I feel like. And this also ignores completely the really monumental marketing task you would have in order to make an indie book part of canon.
Yeah.
Because part of being canon is reaching a giant audience.
Yep.
To enter that subconscious. Yep. You know, that collective.
It's a dream that I think a lot of people have. I mean, like, it would be cool.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
You know, but it's also kind of something that if you're realistic about, you know, is almost certainly not going to happen to you. And I don't think, unless you're already like a pretty big author, probably is not something that you maybe should be striving for, because it's probably not going to happen.
You can always strive for it.
You can always strive for it, but it's like
that, you know, dress for the job you want type of thing, right? But in order to become canon, something has to be beyond big.
Yeah.
I feel like, even.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what he means here. And I mean, I think for him too, he's going to judge, I believe he is going to judge these works again according to his particular set of, you know, primal influences, right? Yeah. So somehow, you know, your fantasy book is going to probably have to play nice with King of Elfland's daughter to find a spot in Jeffro's canon, because he's kind of established this is what you have to understand. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind too.
Deanna Wolf points out that some works aren't even acknowledged within their own era.
Yep.
Yeah. A lot, I feel like, actually.
Yeah. I mean, Lovecraft was published in pulp magazines, but did not gain a really big audience, and didn't. I mean, I would say he's sort of part of the public consciousness, but that almost didn't even happen until, you know, 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
To the degree that he is now. So.
Yeah, and Tolkien didn't die a millionaire.
Right.
Like, he became vastly popular within his own lifetime, to his great irritation. But like, he just, so there, I suppose he was acknowledged within his lifetime, but it wasn't like the dream.
It wasn't like J.K. Rowling,
right,
or something like that,
right. And that's another thing. I don't know how Jeffro feels about it, but Harry Potter is one of the things that probably belongs in a broader canon.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm guessing he would call Harry Potter pink slime or
gray
whatever.
Sludge.
Pink slime.
Pink slime, gray sludge.
But I mean, there's an example of I think everybody acknowledges it's pretty derivative. You know, it wasn't really the first. I think Harry Potter is unique in a lot of ways, but it's not the first urban fantasy book. It's not the first magical academy book. It's not the first. Yeah. You know, it's not the first epic fantasy to the extent that it's sort of epic, but it's definitely something that has captured a lot of people's imaginations and inspired a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Sort of, if you think of canon as mapping out where the genre went and where it's going, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I really like, I do really like Harry Potter, and I'll argue for why I think it's good. And it's not perfect, but
I think we're planning to do a stream at some point.
I mean, even if I didn't think Harry Potter was good, when something is that popular, and this goes for, Robert Jordan, Brandon Sanderson, Orson Scott Card, I'm not going to have a knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, that's bad. My reaction is going to be, there must be something that's good about that makes it so popular. And there's something good in there that we can understand.
Yeah.
And we should, and if you're interested in these kind of things, it's good to know why people like that, right?
Well, that's kind of where I was going with my stream about that show on Netflix.
Sandman.
The Sandman, where I sort of analyzed why I thought audiences were drawn to it as a concept, or as an original book, and then comic, and then sort of gave indie alternatives that sort of would hit those same flavor things that audiences were looking for. I think being able to do that is important. So knowing why people enjoy stuff, even if you don't enjoy it, can be helpful. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Alexandra Constantine had a really nice thread that sort of gave a more balanced, we feel, argument about canon.
Yep. We still disagree with him a little bit.
Yep.
But this is a much more, if this was the take, we wouldn't be from Jeff, or we wouldn't be subtweeting him and having a live stream about this.
Yeah.
Right.
So Alexandra Constantine says that Jeffro's right about the need to read the old stuff, but it's writers that should be well read.
Mm-hmm.
He says that he subscribes to the belief in the great conversation every work a writer puts out is part of an ongoing discussion between writers in the past. How can I take a writer seriously if they don't even know what was said before them? A fantasy writer that hasn't read Dunsany is like a mystery writer that hasn't read Doyle and Collins. Sorry, a little. If you're a genre writer, you have to know and understand the greats that have come before you, because whether you like it or not, your writing is a response to theirs. To be ignorant and proud of it signals that you don't have true depth. Mm-hmm. Where Jeffro is wrong, besides being an asshole, is that a writer has to read and engage with contemporaries also. You can't only live in the past, because you become dull and write only
pastiche.
That's not how I was going to pronounce it.
Wow.
I'm a reader. I'm sorry. It's not a word I would say out loud in my normal everyday conversation. Yeah. So I guess I want to say that I disagree in the idea of a great conversation between writers. Mm-hmm. Unless you have these sort of direct responses. To keep going with the Tolkien example, he responded to a lot of Shakespeare stuff, specifically Macbeth, by taking elements and saying, well, it would really have been better if this, right? The trees are one with the actual moving forest that's actually a forest and it's actually moving, and the other being the way that someone should die if they have been set up as someone who can't be killed by man or woman born, right? So knowing Macbeth makes those things more rich. It doesn't make them unimpactful without knowing Macbeth. So I'm not denying that there is a richness that can be contributed by knowing the stuff that has come before. But I don't think that if you are just writing with your own influences, your own ideas, your own I don't think that means that you're participating in a discussion with other people, especially if your themes have nothing to do with what their themes have to do with.
Mm-hmm.
There can certainly be an interesting back and forth between writers who are producing content, especially in among contemporaries, I feel like. But I feel that great discussion, it really has to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien was intentionally doing those things.
Yeah. And you don't have to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't, and it can go back even to just what your reason for writing is. Like, you just might be, I just want to create something, or I like world building as an exercise, but I want to create an artifact that somebody else can consume from my world building. So I'm going to write a story that's set in it. Right.
Yeah.
And that can just, that doesn't have to be a response to somebody. It doesn't have to be you trying to fix something. It can just be, this is just something that I want to do.
Yeah.
Especially with indie authors, right? It's you can have these neat personal projects that are able to get a little bit wider audience, but they don't have to be like part of this thing.
Mm-hmm. The third tweet that I have here, I think he's making a valid point about knowing your audience. Not so much knowing about the conversation, but knowing what your audience expects. Yeah. If you are a mystery writer and you haven't read Doyle and Collins, you likely are missing reader expectations, because mystery readers know Doyle and Collins. So this goes back to what I was saying about, if you are trying to emulate Dunsany, you should read him. If you are trying to claim him as an influence, or say that your work is derivative of or inspired by or whatever, you should be reading him so that you can deliver on your readers' expectations.
And understand what elements of him that you are trying to put in your own, right?
And I think that kind of goes along with what he says in the top tweet here.
But it's just a more moderated way to make a similar argument that doesn't resort to name calling.
Yeah.
And also, I think also something I appreciate about Alexander is that he does read a lot of modern fiction and doesn't dismiss stuff just because it's trad pub or written by people with different political views, or I know he reads a lot of literary fiction. So yeah, I appreciate that. So it's a viewpoint that's kind of a little bit more open, and still making some good claims, interesting claims to interact with. But is a different take on it. Alexander Helene had a nice take too. He retweeted my Giga Chat and said something to the effect of, for readers, for sure, you don't really have to go into the influence. For writers, it's more important. And then I pushed back a little bit and said, well, how long does it go? How, if there's an obligation, how far back in the chain of influences do I have to understand? And he retweeted me and just said, as far as you want to go for inspiration. And that's kind of my take, right? If you want to dig deeper, and you can dig deeper to look for more inspiration, but
yeah, I didn't clip that one.
Yeah, there isn't it's not like an obligation.
Yeah.
Should we? So we've been going for an hour and a half. So we should talk about our positive vision a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, we wanted to we wanted to engage with this because it's not just something that we disagree with, but is kind of expressing an idea that rubs us the wrong way because of maybe a bigger vision that we have.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Katie and I have exactly the same vision here, but yeah. So something else that I want to tie in here is that a couple weeks ago we engaged with Matt Walsh calling anime satanic thing. And that was kind of a dumb thing. And, we know Matt Walsh was kind of a troll. But the reason that I wanted to engage with that is kind of the same reason I wanted to engage with this. Because you have this person who's kind of well-respected in a certain set of circles that's just sort of dismissing a certain set of things offhand. And that runs really counter to what our vision is.
Yeah.
So do you want to try to make the positive statement of our?
No, you can go ahead and I'll.
Yeah, you just jump in whenever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think what I envision, what I would like to see, and this already exists to a certain degree, right? Is I want to see. I don't like to use the word community, but like a community of people that are, indie authors who are creating cool stuff. I like the idea of people like myself who have sort of other pursuits in life and have these artistic projects having a way to get them in front of an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then better methods than exist now for being able to sort of surface the really good stuff and get it in front of a wider audience.
Yeah.
So just in terms of indie publishing, there's a lot of talk on Twitter, and especially now with the Iron Age thing, there's talk about gatekeeping, the problem, there's questions about, how do you keep sort of bad ideologies out? There's also just how do you keep sort of bad writing out? My opinion is really not that there should be some kind of approving force like small like publishers necessarily. I kind of would hope that there's ways that people can just self-publish, but that if there's sort of a community that that can read and review and cross promote in an effective way, not just retweeting people's tweets, but like reading, reviewing, talking about, interacting with, recommending from a place of, oh, I read that and here's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
Here's why you would read it. Do you want to, you could take that slide down. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's fine.
There we go.
So, and that being the mechanism for surfacing stuff. So, not gatekeeping in terms of there being like a publisher or a small publisher or whatever, but just there is a group of people that and a growing group of people that reads, appreciates, you know, expends effort promoting things like that.
Yeah, and I'll go off of that a bit. My sort of vision for the way that would be done is through, well, Periaps's press, basically.
Yeah.
Reviews, a place where readers can find reviews quickly, find recommendations quickly that of books that they know meet a certain level of quality, but also a certain level of like thematic, like good faith sort of thematic stuff, particularly when it comes to their own personally held beliefs. So even if it's not something that reinforces their worldview 100%, it plays nice with their worldview in a way that isn't, that it leaves room for their personally held beliefs. That, you know, so even if it is not written by a Christian, it's not attacking them or making them feel like they're stupid for believing or making accusations against you know, people who believe in Second Amendment rights. You know, that kind of stuff. Right. You know, so I think that the way to do gatekeeping is not to, and this is where I disagree with A Drink with Crazy about this. I don't think that the way to do gatekeeping is to jump in and be like, no, you're not Iron Age, right? Like, it's not to be like aggressive about things like that, not to make accusations. I really think that the way to make Iron Age something positive is not to go around pointing fingers at each other and saying, no, you don't count. So much as it is to have a place where readers go and they say, oh, this stuff is Iron Age.
Or just some way of getting that stuff in front of the right audience, whether it's a place where they go, or kind of like on Twitter, you know, there's these circles of indie authors and, you know, readers that cross promote stuff. I'm not talking about like hashtag writing community, but I'm talking about like the pulp rev circles. Basically, actually, you know, I've got like almost 100 mutuals with Jeffro. It's those people, right? So, you know, and I think we're still trying to figure out what the right way to do it is, right? Periaps's press is Katie's.
That's my attempt.
And you know, it's not it's something that is not like it's not a money making thing, you know.
It's my hobby.
It's a hobby. It's a labor of love. It's something that, you know, before we had conversations on Twitter about why doesn't it exist, and it's kind of because everybody's a writer and is too busy to write these kind of long form reviews. And there's it's hard to make money from effort like that. So it kind of had to be just something that is done by somebody who's not actively writing and isn't a money-making attempt. And
maybe someday we'll be able to monetize it. But it probably won't ever be money-making, if that makes sense. Because we're paying for the hosting and
we wanted nice hosting without ads and things like that.
So even if I made a little money,
Yeah.
it would all just
go
back to books.
Yeah. So that, like, that's one way. I have some ideas too, right? So I wrote a couple books, and then I've taken a couple years off of writing because I'm working on a big visual art project. And I've shared this with some people, but like my plan is to build this set of capabilities to where eventually I can make really striking visual art and trailers, like book trailers that don't suck, for other people, for myself, and for other people in the space. And it's going to take, I mean I have a full-time job, and this is like a hobby. It's going to take a long time to get there. It might be like another year before I'm able to really put anything cool out there, but that's something that I'm working towards, because I think visual art is really important in being able to promote things and convey quickly what something is about. I think this is one reason why indie comic Kickstarters are so successful and can raise so much money, is because they very clearly are able to kind of communicate what the story is about compared to prose. Like prose is good, but you can't like spend an afternoon writing prose and then post it on Twitter and people like it and get what you're doing. Whereas with visual art, it's easier to do that. So yeah, but I think the general idea is that, our vision of how to do this is by being positive, right? I'm not really interested in finding things that I don't like and putting them down and saying, oh, I didn't like this, it's bad.
Yeah, Doug Wise says making loud announcements at the gate versus gatekeeping.
Yeah.
That's really kind of embodies what we're about.
Yeah. Just the fact of indie publishing and self-publishing is that when there is no publisher or quality filter, there is so much stuff that what you put out there gets lost in the noise. And even on Twitter, right? There's ways you can get followers. It's very hard to build a platform and actually get your stuff in front of people, even if they follow you, right?
Well, and I think that's
so.
Go ahead.
The point that where I was going with that was that you don't need to put things down or suppress things, because by default there's no visibility to anything. Right. So the challenge is, how do you bring up what you do want to shed light on, right? Like how can I push a button and take this book that I like and put it in front of an audience of several thousand interested parties who are going to actually buy it and read it and leave reviews.
Yeah, so
that's the challenge.
So I would wish that when someone Google's Iron Age and sifts through all of the stuff about actual Iron Age, which is not just Iron Age actual point in history, not just a chain of Korean restaurants, and not just a way to belittle anyone's arguments about Christianity, all of which I learned when I started Googling #Iron Age.
Yeah.
But it's also this indie movement. I wish that they would find people saying, hey, I read this Iron Age book and it's good. Not, no, you're not Iron Age.
Yeah.
I wish that they wouldn't see those kinds of disputes. I don't want the hashtag to be sort of drowned out in these petty arguments about that.
And eventually it could be some other hashtag or some other thing, right? Like this isn't about #Iron Age. It's about a vision for how to get indie authors, and I don't know, just in general, like I've got this idea that personal creative projects are valuable and deserve to get a light on them.
Yeah.
Right. I think the reason that, the reason that we are spending so much time engaging with Jeffro is because what he's doing is kind of running contrary to this vision in a fundamental way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not just that we disagree with the points he's making. It's also like the attitude and the tone.
Yeah. Yep. And
so it's kind of a twofold.
I'm going to try not to make too many judgments about his motive here, but what he's essentially doing is he's saying, I'm the arbiter of what is acceptable science fiction and fantasy. If you don't acknowledge, interact with, cite these things as an inspiration, or sort of interact with the field, he keeps using that term, whatever, in the right way, then you suck, right? This is we've showed tweets to this extent. He's just sort of being deliberately insulting to indie authors who cite the wrong inspirations. And I don't think that those things should be the arbiter of what people enjoy and what gets surfaced in this scheme, right? People should be able to write what they want with what inspirations they want, and there just should be mechanisms for getting it in front of the right people. And if a lot of people like something, it should be able to bubble up to the top and not get lost in the noise. That's all. It's and there's, I'm totally fine with there being different communities, right? It doesn't all have to be one community, and we don't all have to play nice, right? Yeah. If Pulp Rev is a thing, I'm not really a member of Pulp Rev. My entry point to Twitter was with people who are associated with Pulp Rev. I used to use that hashtag a little bit when marketing my own stuff, and then I just kind of realized they don't really necessarily have the same inspirations and values, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And if Jeffro wants to make a his own sort of community, and I mean, I think he's done this to a certain extent, where it's like they are the arbiter of books, and you have to love Dunsany to be a part of that group. That's fine. That's fine too. I don't think that is wrong, but I don't think that's should be the only community or the only arbiter of what people should read.
Yep. Yeah, I think you've said it very well. Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to do with Periapsis Press is build something mm-hmm. that's useful for readers. And part of what I'm trying to do is to, instead of saying don't read X, provide lots of alternatives so that you can start with something traditionally published and say, I want more of this element, and then I can find it for you. Or you can find it yourself, by doing a quick search on the website or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like I did with the Sandman, that kind of stuff. Like you can enjoy that, and you can start with a TV show that's mm-hmm. like been completely bastardized, mm-hmm. And say, well, I wish that it had more of this element, and mm-hmm. then go to the website and find other dark fantasy, horror tinged stuff with dream elements, so, but that's the way I'm coming at it. Like, I want to provide options, because what we don't want is people to stop reading.
Yep.
We're not, indies are not competition with one another. They're colleagues. Mm-hmm. And the best thing to be a chain, right?
Yep.
Where you start with one author, you read their book, and maybe you read all of their books, and then you get handed off to the next person in the chain who is writing similar stuff or is writing in this within the same subgenre or has other elements. Like I know that Fiona Wolf likes stuff with doggos, right? So even if they're not in the same genre, they both have a good dog. Here's your next read.
And we want authors to be encouraged too.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of this stuff about the canon and influences and stuff, it could, you know, somebody's got a fantasy book that they read or that they're writing, and, you know, they like Jeffro's opinion about stuff, and then they read these tweets and they're like, well, you know, I guess I never read Lord Dunsady, so he's really not an influence, so that, you know, nobody's going to like my book, so I shouldn't put it out there.
Yeah.
And that I think is sad. I want to see, you know, I wish I had more friends in real life who had kind of creative, big creative projects like I do. And I've really enjoyed the friendships that I've made with people on Twitter over that kind of stuff. And it would be a shame if people were afraid to put it out or whatever. And I mean, some of it's better than others. Some of it could be not so good, but I still think there's sort of value in that stuff. And if you're doing it, you might as well put it out there and see if there's an audience for it.
Yeah. So
I hate the idea that this kind of talk would discourage people from doing that.
Yeah. I was just looking over my about page on Periapsis Press to see if it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because we did put together some.
If it qualifies.
We did have like a purpose statement or something on there at one point, right?
Well, I have my about pages got like what you can expect from the website, and then like our about, and then our policies, and our team, which is just us right now, with the occasional guest post from TJ Marquis and John Delarose now too.
And Patrick.
Yes.
Yep, Patrick reviewed my book, so I'm a official reviewed author, and it's not entirely what's the word? Nepotism.
I felt weird because I think that David's book is great and on par with all of the stuff that I've reviewed, but I felt like it was maybe a little more like underhanded, I guess.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be just like
we want to be above board with this.
Yeah.
And like Periapsis Press, the purpose of Periapsis Press is not to market my books. Right? Like I want to make that clear. And honestly, that's not the purpose of this YouTube channel. It's really even not the purpose of me being on Twitter anymore, right? I mean, if people want to read them, go for it. I spend very little effort trying to promote them at this point. This is not there would be much better ways that I could spend my time if I was just trying to make more money.
Yeah.
Than what we're doing here. And Periapsis Press is not a marketing vehicle for my books.
Yeah. Periapsis Press is kind of my baby. It's where I decided to take my so like I talked a little bit in this stream about my background. When I went to college, I was intending to become a literary agent.
That's what you wanted to do for a career.
Yeah. Where, if you don't know, is like the go-between between a writer and a publisher.
Be a terrible person on Twitter.
like I didn't want to be in publishing, like an actual publisher. I wanted to be reading books and helping connect publishers with readers, writers that were new and interesting and doing cool stuff. And I wanted to be on the cutting edge. And when I came out of college, I was put through a major, and I wasn't really prepared for a job that I like, the specific job that I wanted. You know, I told all of my advisors straight up, this is what I want to do. And they were all like, well, we'll put you in lit. So there was that problem. But then I was also, I got married right out of college and sort of was moving into a new life stage where I didn't necessarily need to have that career anymore. So, but I still had all of this experience and training that I thought was really valuable. And I still wanted to be on that cutting edge. So Parapsis Press has kind of taken that life experience, and then like my new goals and new passions with the indie sphere, to make a sort of indie agent that connects writers with readers and readers with writers, in kind of a similar but better way than my original career idea. And right now, like I said, it's just a hobby.
Yeah.
But
it's just a hobby, but it's all of the stuff that we're doing is towards a bigger goal of kind of connecting writers and readers, and figuring out different ways to go about doing that. And I think both of us feel pretty strongly too about just wanting to be a positive voice in this space. I mean, the nature of social media is that you have this algorithm that boosts things that gets engagement. It's easier to get engagement off of negativity. A lot of the really big accounts on Twitter, I made a long thread about this a while ago. A lot of the really big accounts on Twitter that get a lot of interaction are largely negative. So I think it encourages new authors who are trying to build platforms to come in and interact with them and also be negative. So there's a lot of forces that are encouraging sort of negative attitudes. And I really wish that there was a way that things could be promoted in a positive way.
Yeah.
So both of us are trying in our own ways to, and we're trying a lot of different things to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And this drama is towards that. It's not a thing that we're doing because we have nothing better to do. We're very busy people. But it's kind of towards finding those people that have that same view as us, that there shouldn't be these obligations. You should, as a reader, be able to just enjoy what you like, right? These are all things that are aligned with our goals.
Yeah. And I think that's why, if people are wondering, like, well, why do you keep interacting with this? That's why.
Well, he started it.
Well, yes. I must defend myself.
Yeah.
But also that we're not, we feel that the conversation can have good outcomes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily between us and Jeffro.
Yeah. We're not trying to change his mind or change the minds of the people who like his negative tweets about us or other people. It's about finding the people that we do agree with, and getting a positive opinion out there. Again, like I don't want writers to be discouraged by what he's saying from sharing their work. I don't want readers to feel like, oh, I can't, I'd like to read this indie book, but Jeffro said I got to read Lord Dunsany to understand the field, so I better read that first. It's like, read what you want, write what you want.
And when we say trying to connect with people who agree with us, we're like, we didn't agree with what Alexander Constantine said, but that's not necessarily what we mean by agree with us.
Not people that you know, we're just, you know, trying to find people who are sympathetic to our values.
Yes.
Right. And I would count Alexander Constantine as somebody who's sympathetic to our values. We're not looking for people who are like 100% in agreement, but it's just, even just, you know, on Twitter, in the sea of negativity, how do you find people who are sympathetic towards what you're trying to do?
Right.
All right. Well, it's very late.
Thank you guys for sticking with us. I'll throw my thing back up here. Help support indies. Like we've said, periapsispress.com is my website. And it's really primarily about reviews and news and sharing cool stuff that indies are doing, like excerpts from books and stuff like that. So I often say that like the press portion is kind of like a news portion. There's also the publishing aspect, and then we're trying to develop that, but it's not really about promoting our own stuff so much.
Yeah.
On the website itself.
Mm-hmm.
And we encourage you guys to read indies, and hey, if you like Lord Dunsany, read him too.
Mm-hmm.
And then leave reviews online, help other readers find the good stuff, and then comment below, let us know what you guys think, and especially about the canon issue. If you guys think there is a canon, let us know what you think is in it.
Mm-hmm. Is there an indie canon?
Is there an indie canon?
That's or a pulp rev canon, or something like that? That's an interesting question.
I think Iowa ANCAP asked me if there was a list of must-read indies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, well, everything on the website.
Yeah. Everything that I've read that I like.
All right. Sorry, Patrick. Maybe next time I'll be really teed off and you can see me angry. And then prove that I'm a real human.
All right.
Have a good night.
See ya.
Thank you for joining us.